Okay, good morning again. We'll get going. There's a lot to get through today. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name's Shari. I'm the Operations and Partnerships Manager here at Australian Organic. We've got 3 hours booked in for today and we'll have a couple of breaks in between that. First up, we've got Catherine from Asialink, and joining us will also be Marissa from Thailand. So thank you for joining us live today, Marissa. We'll take a short break. Then Najib from Export Connect will do his piece, and then we'll hear from Owen from Australian Organic. As always, if you have any questions, please just pop them in the chat box underneath, and the slides will all be emailed out to everybody after today. Enjoy. There'll be a lot of information coming through. Have a good time, and we'll see you later. Thank you. Over to you, Catherine.
Thanks very much, Sherry.
Thank you.
Good to be here again this morning, and good to see some familiar faces in the group. Really looking forward to our workshop today, which kind of moves us on to the next part of the journey that you're having as you think about markets that you might explore in Asia. And we're really putting a spotlight today on Thailand. I'll do a few introductions in a minute, but before I go there, we would love just to hear a little bit more about your experience in Thailand. So I've got my colleague Kat with me today. She's going to run the poll for us. Kat, shall we just get that going? So yeah, you should hopefully see a poll which is asking you to just share with us the most relevant response for you in terms of your experience of Thailand. So you might be currently doing business in Thailand or working with Thai counterparts, or you may have visited Thailand for business, or visited Thailand on holiday, or you might not have had any experience of Thailand yet. So please choose the one or more than one of those responses that best reflects your kind of connection with Thailand so far. And it's just as simple as kind of, yeah, just grabbing a cursor and jumping up and choosing one of those boxes that best reflects your experience. So some of you might already be doing a little bit of business in Thailand. Some of you might be exploring it through conversations that you're having with counterparts in Thailand, and others of you might be, having had the opportunity to visit some of those beautiful beaches or the bustle of Bangkok, or may just be at the beginning of your journey. So yeah, just a minute or two to get those thoughts out. And then Kat, once we've got some of those responses, shall we take a look? Okay, great. So we've got a couple here who are currently doing business in Thailand. Do you want to use the chat to just kind of let us know who you are, and for those folks who are working with Thai counterparts? Yeah, feel free if you're one of those people who are already doing business in Thailand or working with Thai counterparts to certainly add your name to the chat so that we can draw on that experience in the group. That'd be really helpful. For others of you, you visited for business, and for others visited on holiday, and a couple of people who are at the beginning of their journey. Look, that's great. We'll use this session to give you a bit of an overview of what we see in the market, with most of the time, of course, being a chance to really get a sense of, when we think about doing business in Thailand, what are some of the important things from a cultural perspective that are different, and that might be useful to understand, and we'll draw on Marissa's expertise there. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me a minute. All right. So hopefully everybody can see that. I've met some of you before, but just as a reminder, my name's Catherine, and I'm part of Asialink Business, which is Australia's National Centre for Asia Capability. Although I've had the opportunity to spend time working in Bangkok, I haven't had the opportunity to live there, and I'm delighted that we've got Marissa joining us this morning from Bangkok. Hey, Marissa.
Hello, I've unmuted. Hello, welcome everybody. I look forward to working with you.
Yeah, So Marissa is the unique bridge, I guess, for us between Australia and Thailand. Sort of born and raised in Australia with Australian Thai heritage. Marissa's back in Bangkok now and really brings a real-time perspective on some of the issues that might be important for you as you think about your business. Before we move into the content of this morning's workshop, we did want to begin by acknowledging the custodians of the lands on which we're present today, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And we do extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending the session online today. I guess we always like to just sort of let you know why we at Asialink are so delighted to have Organic ask us to be part of this session with you. And it's because really at Asialink Group, we have for the last 30 years been thinking about how can we help build greater Australia-Asia engagement so that there is this sense of shared connection, shared prosperity for our region. And at Asialink Business specifically, we have that mandate, as I said, to build an Asia-capable workforce in Australia. We're really delighted that we have the chance to do that with Organics, and thanks to Sherry and Amanda for having us with you today. This session's going to do three things. We're going to give you an overview of Thailand as a country. We'll introduce a framework to help you navigate working across cultures. And then we're going to spend most of our time getting some insights into the Thai mindset and using that insight to help you think about setting up success in Thailand. So maybe some fast facts. I know that about half of you are already doing business in Thailand or have Thai counterparts that you're working with or visiting for business purposes. But maybe some key facts and figures for those of us who are less familiar. So Thailand is the second largest economy in Southeast Asia, and in Australia, it's our sixth largest two-way trading partner. You've got 69 million. Country size, you're thinking about a country that's the size of France. And some important things, I guess, in terms of the unique characteristics of Thailand is we know that it's a Buddhist country. Over 90% of folks follow Buddhism as a practice. And Marissa will talk to us later about how that permeates then a lot of what's important and a priority in terms of priorities for Thai people and for you when you're thinking about doing business. One thing we thought was quite useful was just to take a look at where Thailand is. And it's interesting to see it there, isn't it, as that hub right there in the centre of Southeast Asia. So bordering Myanmar, bordering Laos, bordering Cambodia, and just a hop, step and a jump into Vietnam. And then sort of in the far south, we've got that connection right through to Malaysia. So we often talk about Thailand as being this Southeast Asia hub. And it's got this real advantage of geography in terms of where it is and where it sits. But it's also pretty interesting to take a look at Thailand itself in terms of the makeup. So you can see in the map that we've just popped up now, Thailand's divided into sort of 4 key regions and 77 provinces within those. What we've seen in recent months and over the last while is a real focus on the development of Thailand's Eastern Economic Corridor, which is a massive infrastructure investment in terms of rail, maritime, air infrastructure projects, which will help connect the country. But we also talked, Marissa, didn't we, about the fact that each of those regions are quite distinctive in terms of their importance. And I wonder if you would share with us, how they're different and what that might mean for folks who are on this call today.
Okay, so I think, well, first of all, in terms of trade and business, the current government that's been in power since also the coup will continue on the same government, but now it's an elected government. they've really wanting to make it a national agenda to decentralize wealth out of Bangkok. And so, I mean, in terms of education, what they've done is that they have all the local vocational schools, they've upgraded to university. So in the Northeast, which is the major capital is Korat, as you can see on the screen. That is probably Thailand's second biggest city. And so a lot of wealth, a lot of infrastructure has gone there, and it's no longer provincial, but very, very urban. And there's a lot of heavy manufacturing. So people are having a lot of income. So I think that's a real boost. It also is a pathway into Laos and Cambodia. Also the key, some other cities on the Northeast that border Laos and Cambodia, it's actually seen as a hub, a trading hub for a lot of the Laotians crossing over to buy, you know, products. So you have a lot of department stores, and even though, you know, there is a lot of money in Laos and Cambodia for the elite to spend, and they would prefer to jump over to Thailand because it's literally like an hour and a half bus ride into some of the big urban centers. So a lot of the clinics, supermarkets, wellness, you know, health and beauty, food, all of those things are around the Thai and Laos Cambodian border. And the Northeast is the most populous in terms of population as well. And then you have Chiang Mai, who it's a lovely northern city. Again, Chiang Mai is the hub for northern Thailand. And again, lots of manufacturing, and it's actually a very young city. So they have their own art school. It's very famous for art. There are areas where it's focusing on arts and crafts and organic living. So I know lots of people are interested in an alternative to the way we consume, the way we grow, the way we live. So there's a real interest there. Also, it's a very young city. It's got about 7 international schools, as well as 7 international schools, universities. So there's a lot of also interest around organics. Also, then you have southern Thailand. You have a lot of, it is, in terms of region, southern Thailand is the second richest in terms of head per capita, and a lot of educated people, a lot of entrepreneurs in southern Thailand. And obviously central Thailand is where Bangkok is the hub of politics and culture as well. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions for me? If not, we'll continue, Catherine. So I think there's I'll continue talking. So I think there's a real you know, potential there. Definitely, as the country becomes more educated and interested in organic products. Yes, supermarkets, but also there's more standalone stores now. And so I think also you have, you can, there's food chains, restaurants, all of that, that both sort of sell and also make organic products. So you can go to a restaurant, and they will also, that primarily use organic products, and they'll also sell as well. So I think there's a lot more sort of road avenues to market in terms of distribution point, but primarily at the moment it is still the supermarkets, which are the central group, the mall group, and so really there's quite a monopoly as well. Also with the organic products in Thailand, if you are looking at fruits and vegetables, you're competing with a Thai brand that is the royal products. So therefore that already has a lot of traction in Thailand. In terms of also at the moment, people with COVID and everything, we actually now have a lot of online stores that target both all over Thailand that primarily just sell organic products. So I think that's also a really good avenue, and they can get quite good prices, and you can also get products that you can buy online products through those vendors as well. They're very, very popular because they're actually cheaper than in the supermarkets. So and not a lot of competition, so you can always partner with some of those vendors as well.
Hi Marissa, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm back, and I'm sure there are pieces that you've covered that you'll let me know when we get there. Yes. So let's move on, shall we, and take a look at what's been happening in terms of the context of COVID. Kat, I might just move to the next slide. Yeah. So some of you might know that Thailand was actually the second country to have a COVID case after China, but has done incredibly well in terms of responding to COVID. And the Lowy Institute here in Australia has ranked Thailand as being the 4th best in terms of their COVID response, in terms of being able to put in place the kinds of processes that contained COVID early on. So that was a really great outcome. I guess we have seen a second wave in Thailand, as we've seen in many other countries over recent months, and partly to do with migration issues. Marissa and I were talking about that fact. You know, we already know that Thailand's economy actually operates on sort of great migrant workforce, but in addition to that formal migrant workforce, there are a lot of soft borders. When you're such a long country with many borders, there's a lot of opportunity for movement in and out, and that certainly contributed in some ways to the latest outbreak of COVID. But we're seeing a real light at the end of the tunnel, aren't we, Marissa, with mass vaccinations this year?
Yes, actually the mass vaccination started yesterday. And so by the end of July, they want to have mass vaccinated 70% of Bangkok, because 1st of July, Phuket will be starting this program called the Sandbox, where if you've already been vaccinated with your 2 vaccines, two jabs, you can come to Phuket without having to quarantine. After you've sort of played around and traveled around, no restrictions in terms of the Phuket island, and then you can move to the mainland and go anywhere in Thailand. So they're testing it in Phuket because it can be contained, and then they're going to, once it's successful, do that in places starting off maybe Bangkok, Chiang Mai, in other parts of Thailand as well. So we'll look forward to that.
Yeah, look, because that's been a huge concern, hasn't it? We've seen in Thailand, you know, one of the sharpest economic contractions within ASEAN.
Yes.
And those border closures have had a really significant impact on tourism, especially as you say. So if we look at the latest data, we've seen a drop of around, you know, in terms of the impact on GDP, a contraction of 6.1%. in the economy in 2020. And I guess the light at the end of the tunnel is we're starting to see a tiny little bit of growth, so 0.2% increase in retail sales through to the beginning of this year. So one of the things that we also know that Thailand is doing is really heavily focusing on its economic recovery plan. With a big focus too on moving to sort of Thailand 4.0, this intention to transform Thailand into more of a value-added innovative, knowledge-based economy. We'll talk a little bit more about that too shortly.
Yeah. Also, if you look at the statistics for Facebook, especially during COVID times, I think Thailand is the biggest user in terms of using Facebook for sales. So that's another source as well of how to sell into Thailand. And it's really word of mouth that works well in terms of selling through social media. And I think that's because the big department stores, their percentage is a lot. And so a lot of small to medium-sized businesses are always trying to find alternative to the mainstream supermarkets and department stores.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Marissa. And, certainly, I guess one of the things that we do see as a result of COVID is more of a move to that online platforms, online selling. And I know we'll talk a bit more about that soon. It's probably worth just highlighting a couple of things, Kat, on that next slide in terms of how Thailand ranks across the region when we look at it in terms of sort of a global competitiveness scale. We've talked already a little bit about that wonderful advantage of the geographic location. So when we look at that World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index, Thailand ranks 11th of that group of 140 countries in terms of just location and opportunity for movement. Thailand also ranks well in terms of focus on innovation. But those big red numbers that you're looking at are some of the weaknesses perceived in terms of sort of Thai institutions, trust in politicians, and those things have been difficult for Thailand over a period of time. You might just pop into the next slide, Kat, and take a look at some of that. Yeah. So the weaknesses, if I may just address those, Thailand recently was ranked 104th from 180 participating countries in terms of perceptions around corruption. And so one of the things that has been high, Marissa, on the government agenda has been this real focus of a national agenda to take action to address these. And I wondered if you wanted to share a little bit about what that looks like in terms of the kind of actions that you're seeing.
Yes. Well, first of all, we now have with the new constitution, it's the laws in terms of corruption are applied more equally and strictly to the offenders and not just on them. So let's say a politician has found to be corrupt. He not only is he penalized and has to sort of leave office, get his wealth confiscated. It also is about family, because what's happened before is that because of the stronghold that they have maybe in that constituent, if somebody has had an offense, whatever that is, he then gets his cousin or wife or all of that to sort of then come and take his place. So that's now banned. There's a lot more avenues for people in general to voice and get in touch with an independent corruption organization, and there's more transparency in terms of government bids and all of that. So I think the Prime Minister came out and he addressed the nation and said that he was very embarrassed about how low we ranked in terms of corruption, and that he's going to make it a national agenda and really, focus on that. And it's been quite strange because looking over the past 7 years, what's happened in Thailand is the fundamental structures of change have been driven by outside of Thailand in terms of compliance. Corruption is one. Also, we export a lot of food, especially fisheries, and so the guidelines around netting and people trafficking and labor and all of that around the big fishery industries have been driven by the EU, our major export partners, to create that change. So this is something that's really at the forefront with that sort of pressure. And again, we realize that we're an exporting nation. So to export, there has to be compliance. And so that's what the government is focusing on compliance and being, applying the laws stricter.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marissa. And we've definitely seen that in terms of, the clearly articulated strategy, the national agenda. And as you say, that's the sort of the Thai response to coming out of COVID, ensuring that economic recovery for an export-driven country like Thailand, having regaining confidence in some of those institutions has been key, hasn't it? We'd just like to share a little bit more, Kat, on the next slide, in terms of just moving into, actually, let's look at the retail market itself. Next slide, over. So, as probably having Marissa a little bit earlier, you talked a little bit about the fact that the retail market in Thailand is well developed. But when we think about those 4 regions, there's a different level of maturity from region to region. Did you cover that while I was technologically challenged, Marissa, or is there something? Yeah,
a little bit. I talked about ways to market besides just the norm, the big department stores that is developing, like Facebook. We also have a lot of online vendors now, and so yeah, and yes.
Perfect. So we'll just move on to Kat to the next slide, if we may. And there's some really interesting points just to pull out there, which is when we start to think about for you and your businesses and what you'll be seeing, the first thing that we've seen in the data that we wanted to share is certainly that there is an increasing demand for premium and quality foods and goods and services in Thailand. And when we think about the organic market particularly, that market has risen by close to 16% between 2019 and 2020. And again, we're seeing that there's a willingness to pay, particularly when we focus on organic food compared to conventionally grown food. So 41% of Thai respondents in this piece of research stated that they would pay up to 25% more for organic products than conventionally grown food. So certainly, as we've seen in other markets, but even more so in Thailand, just a greater appetite for some of the products and services that you might be thinking to bring. And that links back, Kat, we might just move to the next 2 slides if we could. It links back to some of those perceptions around Australian products, being natural, being high quality, and this association with clean, green, safe as a real priority. Marissa talked a little bit too about the how-to of getting some of these international products or organic products, and they're available in international supermarkets, but increasingly, as Marissa said, other channels are even more impactful for your kinds of businesses. Partnerships with spas, partnerships with others that could bring your products into markets are really good opportunities to explore. But to make the most of those partnerships, it's really that ability to think about, how can you understand the Thai mindset? How can you actually think about partnerships that will add value? And so I guess we wanted to set the scene a little bit in terms of going deeper into understanding that Thai mindset. We're going to play a short video for you now. And as you watch that video, we're just curious for you to think about what strikes you as you think about that. Kat, we might just turn, thank you.
เขาจะได้อะไรถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวันเขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลยไม่ได้รวยขึ้นไม่ได้ออกทีวีไม่มีใครรู้จักไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้นเพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุขได้เข้าใจได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุด
ไทยประกันชีวิตเชื่อในความดี
Okay, I think while you're putting into the chat, you know, about how you're feeling about the video, what sort of highlights, insights, or what you notice, I'm going to share my screen so then we can continue with my part of the presentation. Okay. Yes, hopefully it's on. Okay, so any sort of comments, any questions, please either come off the mic or put into the chat. Catherine, are there any questions?
No questions from me, but we might just ask folks, you know, I guess the question we might want you to know, you know, what are one or two words that come up for you, or thoughts or feelings that you have as you watch that video? Do feel free to use the chat.
There's one, yes.
And then Marissa, you'll use that to lead us into some real kind of observations around Thai culture and what it takes to be impactful.
Love and respect, yes. Monique, thank you. And going to what Monique said, so I'm sure you're very familiar with the iceberg, and I know that Catherine has talked about the iceberg, but the iceberg for Thailand, a lot of people will know Thailand as the land of smiles. And what's underneath the iceberg, just let me reflect a little bit. The land of smiles, that's so in a culture like Thailand, when we look at time, place, and occasion, the smile does not always mean that I'm happy. It can be a disguise for discomfort, annoyance, anything like that. So in a country like Thailand, where our very high context in our communication and reading the environment, you have to look a little bit deeper into the circumstances surrounding that smile. So you're looking for key to and linking into what you know, Monique was talking about is Dai. Dai means heart. So as a Buddhist country, we know that and we know that our lives are impacted by our karma, or the law of consequence. So what you saw that gentleman do in the video is about creating the good consequence around him to ensure that his life then is supported by goodness. And it is really driven by the heart. So Nam Jai, Nam means water and Jai is heart. And water always flows from the top, from people that have more. So there's a group obligation to look after your community, people that are around you, to make sure that they're okay, like what you just saw in the video. And that's called Nam Jai, without expecting anything back, without expecting to be rich, to even say thank you, because as giving, it gives us a good feeling already, and that's already enough for us. And empathy, a really key one, is that to see other people circumstances, see their heart. And so it's really taking that time to understand their circumstances. And so in the West, we say, oh, you know, don't be hot-headed. So for Thais, it's not about the head, it's not logical. If you look at all the cross-cultural research that's been done, Thai culture in general is more intuitive rather than logical. So everything is related to the heart. So keep a cool heart, which is Jai Yen. Yen means cool, or Jai Ron. Ron is hot. So hot heart or cold heart. And so again, in English, when we talk about understand is to under the context understand it. But in Thai is actually Khao Jai. Khao means in, and Jai is heart. So we're really asking you, rather than do you understand it cognitively or the essence of it in your mind, we're talking about, do you understand it in terms of the heart? So it really is important to, when you work with Thai people, to always build in a little bit of buffer time to build those key relationships. And from my experience working cross-culturally for the past 21 years, Australians, because of our lightheartedness, mateship culture, and humility, Thais really understand that, and also can relate to that as well. Okay, if no more questions, I'm also looking at the chat while I'm talking, so please feel free to put questions or remarks or experiences into the chat as well. We're very, you know, Thai-centric. Only English is used in schools, and it's really a second language, so a lot of people are more fluent. And why we're not as good in English as maybe Malaysia, Singapore, because we've never been colonized, but we take a lot of our infrastructure and judiciary systems and cues from Britain. So that's why English is maybe not so good, but you know, now you have tools and it's easier to, I'm finding it a lot easier to, and people also can reply and communicate more in English as well. One of the key things in Thailand and doing business with Thai people, in our culture, we're not taught to say no. So therefore, asking closed questions, do you understand me? You're always going to get a yes, because a direct no is disruptive to harmony, and harmony is also one of the key values. So always, use open-ended questions, read the non-verbal cues. Do they understand? And silence for a lot of Thais is about processing. So we're risk avoiding, we're not spontaneous unless we really know you and have a comfortable, close relationship and friendship with you. So silence for Thais is used to process English. You might be speaking too fast, and it is not to interrupt. So it becomes a sign of respect. And Thais are actually quite comfortable with some silence. It's not a big deal. All right. Any questions so far? Yeah. And so this is the we use this GlobeSmart profile and the GlobeSmart dimensions as a way to look at Thai culture and some key differences. So the first dimension is independent and interdependent, egalitarian status, risk adverse, so comfort around uncertainty, which ties, because we're process driven, we're compliant, group orientation, it is leaning towards certainty. Now, in that, the millennials, the newer, smaller entrepreneurs are more willing to take risk, but calculated small risk with mentoring and clear processes. Right. The level of directness is indirect. So we weave around the point because for a lot of for Thais, time is not about money, is a process. And a little bit like, it's like the effort in growing organic goods. And so time is a process. And so therefore, the more you get outside of urban centers, the slower the pace of work, the slower the pace of business, because it's about it's not about the money, it's about the process. And also trust, it's about, we need to know about you as a person. Do we have shared values rather than let's get on with the job? So that's why I said build in some time when you initially meet your Thai counterpart doing business in Thailand, upfront with meetings. Don't expect to get straight onto the task within the first meeting. So ease into that, and Thais want to know you. When we trust you, we will go above and beyond. And so build in that sort of get to know each other time, and continue with that get to know each other time slowly. You don't need to overexpose about yourself and your family, but just more chit chat and take it slower. And as you can see, there are some key big gaps in terms of the Australian GlobeSmart profile and the Thai GlobeSmart profile, and how that sort of impacts. Definitely. I'd like to, Catherine, from your perspective, having lived in Asia, worked in Thailand, and I know you know a lot of Thais, what are some of the key sort of cultural dimensions that might impact business?
Yeah, well, I think you've probably talked to one of the biggest ones. Certainly is that emphasis on relationship and the orientation towards time. So I guess when I think about my own experiences and the experiences of other non-Thais in Thailand, the coaching that I often give for folks like me, and my own experience too, is doubling the length of time that you might set aside for a meeting, because often here in Australia we expect our first meeting to be focused on a task, achieving information and knowledge, whereas my experience too of being in Thailand is that first part of the meeting, maybe 3/4 of the meeting, might be spent on building that relationship. So the two seem to go quite closely together.
Yes.
The relationship and kind of the use of time and thinking.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think the video, if you look on the dimension of independent and interdependent, the video really links into that interdependence of your surroundings and your environment. So it's really about showing namjai, kindness to others, the people that you impact also is very important. So again, when you look at interdependent culture, it's the we that is bigger than the I. So if you look at the Thai flag, is red, white, and blue. Red stands for the sovereign state of the Thai nation, the blood that we have shed to keep Thailand free. And the white stands for religion. So as a country, we are non-aligned. We don't have a national religion, but Buddhism is the most practiced religion. And blue is the institution of the monarch. And I think this is where the big shift in Thailand will be happening, because throughout this current reign of Rama X, he is our most unpopular king for many, many reasons. And we've had a lot of young people coming up to protest. So I think this real sense of voicing, of being more vocal, shifting from that sort of indirect communication to a more direct culture, a little bit more demanding, sort of, I think the word demanding is incorrect, being more assertive. Now, in the prior generation, assertive is seen as compliance, but I think the younger generation understand more, this is our right to talk, to ask, to request, and to create change. And so I think and it's really interesting for me as a Thai person to start looking at how this current government have compromised and shifted a little bit to accommodate their voice, but also maintaining that balance around still keeping up with the law, because we do have the La Majesté law saying that you can't say anything bad or detrimental towards the king or the royal family. Now, a lot of the key protesters have been thrown into jail, but they've served a certain amount of time and then they've been allowed out on bail. So there's this real sort of dance going on in Thailand and Thai around how do we move forward, creating a space where people can share, can talk, and being a little bit more direct with institutions and being more assertive. So it's really interesting as an observer to watch that. Any questions? Please come off mic, or you can write in the chat. I also have my chat on. Anyway, I'm going to go forward. So just as a summary of what are some key differences. So we don't know how to say no, and it's never a direct no. Face for Asians, for Thais, and it links into the hierarchy and egalitarian dimension. Face is about shame. So I don't want to shame my group, again, because we see ourselves affiliated with the group. If I say something wrong, if you scold me in public, not have I just offended or you've spotlighted I've done something wrong. I've also shamed my group because the identity is based on the group. So therefore, the name cards are very important because it represents who I belong to, what group I belong to. And so therefore, when you meet Asians and Thais, it's about sort of this is their face as well, and how you respect that face through the name card affiliation is very important. Formality, and so formality links into hierarchy. Hierarchy in Thailand is not like India where you have the caste system, but it is because we're much more populous than Australia, for instance. People still live in big communities or an extended family environment, and formality linked to hierarchy keeps harmony in the group. Okay, and I'll show you some, you know, the why, the greeting, and how then you can read the formality in terms of that. So flexibility, again, because we live with so many people and we have to share resources and not only think of ourselves. Thais become very flexible, and that's one of the things that has also kept Thailand free from colonization as well. Is there a tolerance for early mistake in communication with Thai? As a non-Thai, totally. So, and I think they're going to read the intention behind the words, and you can always, you know, smile and say, oops, sorry. In terms of joking, and I think Australians are humor that Thais don't get is self-deprivation. So don't ever say, oh, stupid me, you know, I shouldn't have done that. Because it's like, how come you're calling yourself stupid? If you're stupid, your company mustn't be so smart. Your family is pretty not smart then, because you're a representation of them. So hold off on the self-deprecating humor, but definitely Thais will give sort of, there's more tolerance around mistakes when communicating with Thais. Yeah. We tend to generalize, patient, indirect. We're very family orientated, and it links into nicknames. So a lot of your Thai colleagues, a lot of the people that you might meet in Thailand will use their rather than their formal first name, and will introduce themselves as their in their nickname. And it's a great way of getting to know Thais, because it always has a story. It's either it's given to them by their family, it's either a short version of their name, or a value or something that is linked into the fabric of the family essence. So for instance, I know this family, they're Sino-Thai, so have Chinese heritage, and one of their key values is money, right? And so they named their grandchildren pound, dollar, franc. And so really, and that's then you can get that sense of, oh, what's that family about? And it's a really good way of striking up a conversation with Thais and getting to know them better in a light-hearted way, or it's a shortened version of their name. So my nickname is Sa, and it's a shortened version of Marissa. And Marissa in Thai actually has a meaning. So therefore, you can strike up that conversation. And if you know a little bit about the meaning of your name, it creates this, oh, that's interesting. We're learning in an informal way, short, quick ways of understanding, getting to know each other a little bit more. Any questions so far? Please put into the chat or come off mic. Or Catherine, if you have anything to add or ask, please feel free.
I'm curious, but we might cover it soon, Marissa, how we might pull some of those things together. So for folks who are thinking about exploring new business opportunities who are already in the market, maybe how these things might weave together into some of the do's and don'ts that we should follow.
Okay, definitely. Well, and again, the so what? Again, I touched a little bit on it, sort of high context. So I think this is something that is really changing. Thais are much more comfortable now, obviously with Zoom, with web meetings and things like that. But when you have an opportunity, do come face to face. In a Thai hierarchical culture, what is the common thread that cuts across hierarchy is food and fun and lightheartedness. So if you can create that even in a Zoom meeting, a quick sort of fun, 5-minute go around, I want to see your face, all of those things will really help that. Connect through social media. So Thais here, a lot of you use WhatsApp. We have Line application, which is a Japanese application, exactly the same. A lot of people sell through Line. So a lot of, you can have line official accounts and people order directly on through line. So that's another great way of reaching. So you link your IG page, your Facebook page, and link it into line pay. And you can then directly message your consumer, promote. So all these sales that are going on are all through adding line application. So that's another way. And people sell food, people sell fruits and vegetables, makeup, everything through line application. And everything's prepaid. So they will never send you anything online if you have not paid and send in a electronic pay-in slip. And that's how you keep. And so, you know, that's been the main medium so far of trade through these COVID times. Any questions so far? Any more questions, anybody? Okay, I've working with Thais, what I recommend you to do is take time to build strong relationships. Thais see you're giving them your time, spending time to mentor, to talk, and to eat with them, or if you come from Australia, and definitely bring some products to show and to taste, to sample, but not just for them, but also a little bit with their teams. Eat with them. That time is seen as respect. Also, what Thais, because we don't say, I don't understand, can you please repeat as the norm, it's also okay to ask Thais to say to them, so what's your next step? What are your sort of key insights? Ask that of your Thai colleagues and stakeholders so you know that you are aligned. And then if you don't think it's aligned, you can then help them to fill in the gaps. Also, you can banter about sort of deadlines. Knowing that Thais see time as a process, how do you banter with that deadline? When can you deliver it to me? What's a good time for you? Do you have a lot on your plate? What does that look like? Because Thais respect our words. So if you say to them, oh, can you give it to me by 2 p.m.? You've actually set the deadline. The Thais can't say no. So they say, oh, yes, yes, yes. But yes doesn't mean yes. Yes means I hear you, you're speaking something, and I've got a deadline that I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do because you've asked me, do I understand? And I said, oh, yes, I understand. But in actual fact, no, I don't. I don't understand the slang, you're speaking too fast, all of those things. So slow down and banter, negotiate that sort of comeback time. Thais will most likely keep that time because they've given their word. We have and on the last point, when we talk about we don't have colleagues, we have family, using nicknames, talking, getting to know one another is being inclusive into the Thai work family. So once you're in there, you can't get out of that Thai work family. Yeah, I'd actually be really interested in hearing from people that have Thai stakeholders and have worked in Thailand, as well as those that have not worked in Thailand. So I'm going to give 5 seconds, I think, for those, or 5 or 10 seconds for any questions off mic or on the chat. Or Catherine, if you have any questions you want me to elaborate on some do's and don'ts. Any questions?
I think it's really interesting for us, isn't it, Marissa, in terms of thinking about those relationships in the context of really being as if it were a family.
Mm.
And so that real strong focus in terms of how would you act in a family, or what do you do when you're with a family? How is that really different from typically what we might do in an Australian business context?
And I think, you know, trust, and if you look at all the equations, the generic equations of trust, which is, you know, reliability, competency, and credibility, divided by less of self or less self-interest, they already know you're the expert, and that's why you're here. You know, your credibility will be based on who introduces you as well. So that's your soft power, soft trust that you can automatically gain. So if a good friend of mine introduced me to you, you're leveraging and the trust that I trust my friend will be given to you as an honor to my friend. So that credibility is there. But it's about showing that it's not all about me, me, me. It's I'm looking for the interest of the whole group, of everyone, less of self-driven agenda. Okay.
Daniel's got a great question, Marissa. Daniel's asking, you know, given our current COVID context particularly, how can we build a relationship with a potential partner with an online inquiry or a prospective type?
I think, first of all, if you get an online inquiry, call them. So going back to that high context, rather than answering over the phone, on an email or something, if you can, organize a call straight away. So thank you for your inquiry. Hey, can I have a call with you? I really want to get to know you a little bit more, understand your business. And so always with the COVID situation, when you can, go to a warmer communication style. And so once you've called them, whatever you have summarized or whatever understanding, then write it in an email and summarize the understanding. Because this, then they can slowly read it, it's documented, and then it's a bouncing board that you can sort of foundation of moving forward. Also, it gives the Thai person time to maybe Google Translate, you know, go to a friend going, what does that mean? I don't understand that slang, you know. So it gives them that sort of delayed processing time. And it gives you comfort in that, okay, we can use this to sort of move forward.
You raised a really good point. Yeah, it's a great question. And Marissa, you raised a really good point, which is obviously we want the warmth of connection, which we can get, you know, through phone or better through video con, but we're also trying to balance some of the lack of language synergy. So where English is, you know, a second or third language, and perhaps there are some complications in using English. What are some other things that you've seen work well, where English language might be constrained, but we're trying to build warmth in the relationship and connection?
I think one of the key things is, and it sounds really basic, I'd actually get them to connect with either through WhatsApp or Line, and that use social media. And there's a lot of emojis, there's a lot of stickers, and Thais always use that. I know it sounds really simplistic, but really that will help you create that sort of humorous, light-hearted side. And Thais are always like greeting one another with, oh, hi, how are you? I hope everybody has a lovely day. We're not a physical, lovey-feely, huggy country culture, but we're definitely heart-driven. So we always wish people well, and that. So going back to, and I think that's where Buddhism plays a lot. So the four core fundamentals of Buddhism, if nothing else, Thais live by, empathetic joy, compassion, kindness to all, and equanimity. And so that's where that sort of comes from. Yeah. Does that make sense? And I'll link into sort of, the, not so much the do's and don'ts, but the norms around greeting in Thailand. So I talked a little bit about the name card just a few minutes ago, and the nickname as well. Kun is a formal but cordial, polite word to use in front of everybody's name. So rather than a lot of my friends call me, even though we're friends, Kun Sa. And it comes from the fact that we're not childhood friends, we're adult friends that have met through, I might have still known them for like 20 years, but they still call me Kun Sa as a sign of respect, but using that sort of nickname to each other and vice versa. And so, but if they introduce me to a third person, then they shift to make it formal. So there's an inner circle of friends that I would address you with Kun still with my nickname. But if it's an outer, more formal outside, I would then use Kun Marisa or whatever their first name is. So it really depends on that sort of relationship. And so how do you tell hierarchy at a glimpse? Similar to maybe like Japan. So the greeting is always lower the head in Japan. In Thai, we use the Y. And so what happens is, the rule of thumb, the guest will always be greeted with the Y first. So if I was to meet you, I would always Y you first, and the lower the head means the more respect I give you, and then you reciprocate. Right? So it's based on you're a customer, a stakeholder. If you're the guest, the Thais will always greet you first as a sign of respect, and then you reciprocate, and the height of the bow of the head can be equal to or the same or a little bit higher. They know that you don't know the total protocol, so there's a lot of leeway around that. And so also you can then tell in a Thai context as who, with your Thai colleagues, who then is the more senior people. Normally if you're meeting, let's say the central group or the mall group, one of the bigger department stores, the more senior one of their people are, the distance, the physical distance of the group will give them is larger. So that there's a larger sort of like space between the more senior person than the rest of the group, and they will always go first. Yeah. And so be mindful of that. What else? Thais love food. So if you have an opportunity when COVID is all over and, we can travel, I think, Blackmore have done such a great service for the Australian organic supplement products. And people will often, like I know both of my kids are now living in Australia. If they come back to Thailand, all of their relatives will call them first and say, hey, can you bring me this vitamin? Can you bring me this supplement, this organic, that? And so it's really, really popular. And so I think there's a really big market, and Australia have a very good reputation as a culture, as a country, and in terms of product and services as well. So I think,
That's wonderful.
Yes.
That's incredibly helpful, Marissa. Thank you so much for that.
Yes. Can I do 2 fun facts before I go?
Yes,
Because
of
I
course.
something that I think that would be quite fun. Fun facts about Thailand, because I know you did fun facts earlier on. When we say Bangkok, so everybody knows the capital city of Thailand in English is Bangkok. As a Thai person, it's not Bangkok. In Thailand, we have the longest city name in the world, and I can't recite all of it, but here's 3/4 of it is กรุงเทพมหานครอมรรัตนโกสินทร์มหินดีลามหาดิลกนพรัตน์ราชเทวีบุรีลม That's part of the name of Bangkok as a capital city. So it's often called the City of Angels because the first 2 words are part of that, in that sort of long name, we actually call it the City of Angels. It's where the angels preside. So that's one. Another one is when you do business in Thailand, we do use the Christian year, but in official documents, we use the Buddhist calendar year. So it is right now in the Buddhist calendar year, it's 2563 is the Buddhist year. So the difference is 549 years. Okay, so if you see 2,500 something, we're talking about the Buddhist year. So some fun facts about Thailand. That's it. Any more questions? I'm going to stop.
I love those. I love those fun facts, Marissa. Thanks so much for that. And look, I guess for folks who are, thanks, Corey. Just to call out. And yes, certainly there's a recording and the PowerPoints will be shared with you. But yeah, so thanks, Marissa, for kind of bringing us all together in terms of kind of what would be important. So I guess, some things for you to think about as you go into the next part of your session and think about the export elements of getting ready to go to market is certainly, we know that the Thai market is, a lot of potential for us in terms of our Australian products, partly because despite the COVID situation, we see that sort of growing consumer affluence and that directed towards a desire for quality and organic safe produce and other products. So that's sort of fast fact and important fact number 1, I guess we would say. The second thing, certainly, as we've seen, is that there's this real strong focus within Thailand right now in terms of a strong national agenda to ensure that processes and infrastructure are set up to help us do business well. So in terms of importing, that creates a great opportunity for us. And then the key really is the sorts of things that we've heard about from Marissa, which is the importance of this heart at the core of everything that's important in terms of Thai context. So when we're thinking about forming those relationships, just using those small pieces that we've heard about in terms of finding ways to connect, finding ways to be human, the use of the nickname, the use of the why, and finding ways to overcome some of that language barrier through communication, which is broader. So beyond just the mail, think about calls, think about video, think about social media as a way to build that connection. So with that, huge thanks to you, Marissa, huge thanks to all of the group. We're coming to the end of the session. You've got a 10-minute short break before you head back online with Najib, who's waiting for you at 12:25. Just to reiterate, the recording of this session, the copy of the slides, and also access to a country starter pack on Thailand is available for all of you post this session. So take your short break and see you back here at 12:25. Thanks, everybody.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Marissa and Catherine for such a great session on understanding the cultural dynamics in dealing with Thailand, and a little bit of understanding on Thai consumers as well. I can certainly share my experience in exporting to Thailand, which was a very positive one. I learned very early on that you need to be very explicit in your emails and your communication. Because yes, language is a little bit of a barrier. Even those that have studied abroad, I found that you can't be vague because their response will sometimes be completely unrelated to what you were, wanting to hear back on. So yes, my advice there is be very specific in your communications when dealing with Thais, and keep it simple. Don't make it vague, and don't try to trick them or anything like that. Just keep it very, very, very black and white. We are going to go into some detail around the Thai market from an export market perspective. Just quick housekeeping. As you all know, this webinar is being recorded, and so you'll have links to this to watch again and again and again and again. You've got the Q&A function there, so any questions you have, please fire them through. I have Ujan and Rajeshwari in the room with me, and so they'll help me to make sure that we answer your questions as quickly as possible. If there's anything a bit more detailed than we expect, than to be able to respond to on this webinar, we will certainly continue that after the webinar. Normally we would be in a room and we would all see who's joining in and who's learning and who's contributing in this new age. We don't have that opportunity, so we've just put up a slide of some of the brands of the businesses that registered for this session. So you can see there's quite a wide mix across different business sizes, in addition to different categories being involved. And so later on, we focus on, whenever we deliver these webinars, we focus on the categories most represented by the groups. So we will be doing that later on when we talk about the categories. Looking at the registration list, most know who Export Connect are. There are some new that have attended, that are signing up for this, which is fantastic for Australian Organic Limited to bring in more and more people who are interested in export markets. We know that there's a need for businesses and indeed a growing demand of businesses to diversify their risks and not just be reliant on one or two markets and not just be reliant on one or two channels. And so wonderful that Australian Organic Limited has provided the opportunity for businesses in general and specifically certified organic businesses to learn more about export markets. Thailand being today, of course, we've delivered 4 other markets already within the Asia remit, including UAE. And prior to that, we ran workshops on Sweden, Germany, and the UK. So who is Export Connect? Why listen to us? Well, we help food and agribusinesses enter and grow export markets. We provide detailed market insights, competitor analysis, pitch development, and introductions to our pre-qualified buyer database according to your category. We've since founding, and we are 4 years old as of this month. So it is our 4th birthday. We've delivered over 180 projects for 120 clients, covering 20 markets, from very big businesses to small, of which many are certified organic businesses, which we are very excited about. In terms of the session we're going to be covering right now, before we bring in Owen for his expert insights around certification for organic certification for the Thai market, we're going to look at some of the market selection factors. We're going to look at the economic demographic overview, consumer channel overview, category and trade data reviews. We're going to be looking at trends as well. We're going to be looking at how do you assess in-market competitors, and then we're going to bring up some slides of some of the competitors of the categories we're going to focus on. We'll talk about the market selection scorecard, what support is available, and then Owen will come on and dazzle us all with his certification knowledge for sharing for the Thai market. So in terms of market selection factors, what do we need to focus on when we look at a market for export opportunity? Well, we need to understand the economic background of the market. And some of that was already shared by the Asialink crew. And so these are things like GDP per capita, growth rates, things like that. You know, we need to know demographic profiles in terms of what kind of expats, you know, they're expats, the locals, urban, you know, how's it all set up? We look at consumer trends in terms of other consumers in markets that we're researching, looking for convenience. Are they looking for health? What are they actually looking for? We look at the market size itself, which Thailand is by numbers quite a large market, you know, more than double the Australian size market. We look at market growth prospects, and this is really interesting in the context of the pandemic because markets are coming back at varying degrees from where they headed into the pandemic from. We need to look at the categories that you're in and what's the size of that category. Just because a market is big doesn't mean that they're necessarily consuming your products. And are the growth prospects for the category strong? And are the trends trending towards the unique selling propositions that you would typically articulate for your product? We need to look at channel trends, what's happening in retail, what's happening in food service, what's happening in e-commerce, the latter being of particular interest with consumers at some point or another, you know, practicing social distancing and not wanting to go out into the trade, in particular when looking at the food service channel. We need to assess who our competitors are, right? I mean, we can have everything stack up perfectly, that the market is a good size and it's growing, that consumer trends are heading towards what your product offers, that your category is good size and growing, and that you know, retail is booming and that's your product is catered heavily for retail. But then if you don't study the competitors, you may not realize that in market is a product that's nearly identical to yours, selling for a better price. Or alternatively, you may realize that there are products selling for a price that don't have the claims that you're able to offer. And so you may be able to compete at a slight premium. So not understanding that means all the other research you've done is almost irrelevant. You know, what are the dispersion rates? The good thing about Thailand is there are a few retail chains. And so, but you know, you really do want to get in the tops if you can, and Villa Market and you know, a few others. So what trade data is available? So is your category, where does Thailand source its products within the categories that you produce, right? Using the HS codes, harmonized commodity codes, and then have a look at where does most product within your code get exported from Australia, and is Thailand in the mix? Look at market access, and we've got a free trade agreement with Thailand, which makes it very useful for us and handy. But having said that, there are still some, you know, barriers, some quotas involved, free trade agreements, and then certifications. What certifications do you require? And of particular note and interest is the you know, organic certification, which Owen will be talking through a little bit later. So when we look at the you know, key demographic indicators, as I mentioned, you know, Thailand is more than double, almost triple our population. Having said that, urban population is only 51%. And why that's a concern for when we're assessing export markets is that for premium type products, of which ours you typically fall into, we need high-end supermarket chains, and high-end supermarket chains only exist, generally speaking, in urban areas where there are shopping centres and where people of affluence and professionals live. So while the population is significantly larger than ours, almost straight off the bat, before we even blink an eye, we can discount half the population from our target list before we start discounting even more. Population growth rate is pretty poor, and Human Development Index is not so hot. The Human Development Index is important because it covers things around health and education, and so generally speaking, because product from Australia is all natural, functional, has healthy attributes. It requires an educated consumer base. So all that means is it doesn't mean that that doesn't exist in Thailand. Of course not. It does exist. It just means of the 69 million people, we're actually probably whittling it all down to who our target customer base is, which may actually end up being a couple of million people. So what that does is it sets an expectation. When exporting to Thailand, it's a big market, but from an expectations perspective, we probably wouldn't expect it to be selling more than what we sell in Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne. From a key economic indicator perspective, the GDP per capita, or GDP, despite being a much bigger population, is a fair bit lower than Australia's, and the GDP per capita is considerably lower, which reflects the high urban population. The GDP growth rate, Australia is doing a little better than what we had expected. Thailand is, at least not negative. Some of the other markets we've looked at, the growth rate for first quarter 2020 is still negative, but it's just starting to come back. Ease of doing business is important because if you end up having some disputes along the way, you need to be able to have a system in place and processes where you can deal with it, and so that would suggest that apart from setting up a company and whatever else in Thailand, that it's not such a complicated place to deal with. And the Logistics Performance Index puts it in the top 20% of the world, which is pretty good. Cold supply chain is quite decent. So for those of you that have products that require refrigeration and movement, it's not a basket case. Like it's quite good. When we look at the consumer characteristics, what we know that there are some similarities between Thais and Australians. We know that they're seeking healthier lifestyles. We know that they're active online shoppers. We know that they research products of higher priced items. Word of mouth is important. Becoming more budget conscious, convenience seeking. Where some of the key differences are that they are brand loyal, which following Marissa's session doesn't come as a surprise. Obviously, emotion and heart is very important. Sense of family is very important, and that tends to play out in brand loyalty. They're brand conscious and price sensitive. Of course. They are willing to indulge, and but they also do have busy lifestyles, which was also covered. And travel is quite especially by car is. I don't know if anybody. Obviously, some of you have been to Bangkok, and if you're not using the Sky Train and you're traveling by road, to allow 2 hours to travel to a meeting that would typically in Australia take you 15 minutes to get there. COVID has hit Thailand hard, being a market that is heavily reliant on the tourism sector. Limited flights has really hit the market hard. Also, there's been a declining demand for Thai goods globally, so they're seeing a bit of a trade deficit happening. Unemployment's pretty high. That's from a sentiment perspective, plays on the minds of people in terms of their spending. Spending has been suppressed for quite a while. The good news with that, however, is consumers are now starting to that still had jobs and had incomes, have a bit of money. And so we see the willingness for them to invest in organic goods, which are typically more pricey, is starting to play out. And of course, is with all markets across the ASEAN region. This is not unique to Thailand. It's consistent across all. The drive towards healthier eating, well-being is strong. And organic, as a brand, a certified organic product, just as a brand, is considered to be, it's insinuated that it's assumed that it's better for you and healthier. So when we look at the consumer trends now, we're not going to read each point out. You can do that as I speak. But as a fundamental, when we're looking at consumer trends, as mentioned, that they're brand conscious, brand loyal. Having said that, COVID has encouraged new product trials because for either that the brand that they typically purchase wasn't available because of supply chain issues, or because their local neighborhood store didn't stock the brand that they typically want to buy. So it has opened up the path for new products coming into the market to be trialed, which with consumers starting to look at organic products more and starting to open their wallets a little bit more is a really good sign. Eating out is still important in Thailand. It doesn't mean that the food service sector hadn't been hit. It certainly has, but eating out is still important. And you know, immune boosting, healthy, well-being foods, including concern for the environmentally friendly packaging, are all playing a part in the decision-making process of consumers. When we look at the Thailand sort of channel review here, you can see supermarkets have been doing well. Hypermarkets have not. And that's generally because hypermarkets are in the bigger shopping centers, and you know, there's been a reluctance for people to go to the bigger shopping centers because of social distancing. Convenience has seen growth, and we'll see even faster growth. Food service hasn't taken as big a hit as almost every other market we've delivered this workshop about. And that's because Thais still, you know, have that high sensory need, which also Marissa spoke about. And so they enjoy the smells and the aroma of eating, and eating out is a very important part of their culture. So it has been hit, it has been impacted, but it's not as dramatic as what we've seen in other markets across Asia and Europe. E-commerce, now these statistics are for e-commerce altogether. It's not just food and agri. Food and agri forms part of this. E-commerce has gone berserk, and so you know, it's in every market now. When e-commerce was a nice to have kind of conversation, you know, we need to, when we're assessing markets, really consider e-commerce as a genuine channel for products to go through. Health and beauty, you know, has had a little bit of a hit because there are less occasions to go out. But by and large, actually, we see for skincare product in particular, the demand is actually quite high. So when we look at grocery retailing in terms of trends, you know, we know that there's a move to convenience. That includes dining in store in some of the better retailers like Tops, and ready-to-eat meals to take home as part of the, you know, when they're not going out to eat, they're cooking at home, that convenience element. Tops is the leader in the supermarket channel. They've got a large membership base, so they have a membership program. Villa Market is growing faster, adding more and more stores. In fact, in 2 weeks, we're running a webinar on the Thai market again, but this time not certified organic focused. It's just about the Thai market in general. And we actually have a buyer from Villa Market that's going to be on a Q&A panel that we're facilitating with that. So you know, that'll be really interesting to see. But yeah, Villa Market is a very important retail chain for Australian businesses that need to have their product sold through a retail channel. Rapid urbanization is seeing a proliferation of convenience stores. So there's a shift towards convenience stores before the pandemic already. As a result of the pandemic, it's even stronger because people are focusing more on buying from their neighborhood stores rather than traveling far to go to their regular stores. And that's the reason why hypermarkets have suffered over this period. And you'll see there on the right-hand side some of the key supermarket chains, hypermarkets, and convenience stores. From a food service trend perspective, you know, it's a highly fragmented market in terms of food service, in particular full service restaurants. And you know, many of these full service restaurants have moved towards home delivery of their meals, which is common across the world. But despite the home delivery and despite the desire to eat out, sales are still overall a little bit down. QSR in particular, however, is suffering, and that's largely because of a lack of tourists. And so what the QSR operators have had to do, so that's quick service restaurants, what they've had to do is adapt a lot of the menus to suit the local tastes. So when we look at a full service restaurant breakdown in Thailand, you see there, and this is the fragmented nature of this area, the chained full service restaurants are virtually all imported. So local Thai restaurants are not generally chains. They're just all completely independent. And we see 75% of full service restaurants are Asian cuisine oriented. North America has a little bit, European has a lot less, but it's mostly Asian influenced. When we look at quick service, like limited service restaurants, the big brands that we all know around the world are there too. You'll see that the convenience stores show up as well because they got the noodles and, that you heat up in the convenience store and eat on the go. And they dominate the limited service restaurants, which you would expect by the sheer volume and number of the convenience stores. It's followed by chicken focused QSR, pizza, and then the rest. When we look at the e-commerce trends in Thailand from a food and agri perspective, it was already growing before the pandemic. The pandemic has just really catapulted the desire to purchase through the e-commerce channel. We know that online food delivery services have grown significantly over that period, with nearly 40% of consumers using the home delivery services. Now that includes delivery of food from food service. So this is not grocery shopping only. In fact, grocery shopping is the smaller percentage of that. But what it's showing is that there's this willingness to have food brought to the house, whether that be grocery and or food service related. And that's a trend that doesn't look like it's going to, the accelerated growth may recede, but it's going to continue to grow. So until now, e-commerce has been focused on urban centers, where obviously the more affluent people are, but also, delivery is much easier when you only need to go short distances to supply high populations. And on the right there are some of the, you'll see some of the leading retailers are where a lot of the consumers go to do their grocery shopping online, but there are some pure online play marketplaces as well. When we look at the categories reviews, and so we're focusing, let's look at certified organic sort of stats as a whole, and then we'll go into the ones that are most prevalent within the cohort sitting in on this webinar. So you'll see that generally speaking, the category values are low, right? So certified organic sales in Thailand are not high in terms of value. We see baby food's got a little bit, breakfast cereals has a little bit, rice, pasta and noodles in terms of from a packaged food perspective have a bit. What's important to note is that for some of these categories, they're experiencing high growth, off a low base, but they're experiencing high growth. And we expect that to continue and maybe even accelerate as there is this move towards healthier, better eating, as wallets are opening up, and the suppressed spending translates into the ability for consumers to purchase more premium product. When we look at organic beverages, also, relatively speaking, low bases, but we see this bit higher volume value in organic tea and organic coffee, with fruit juice and vegetables, having organic fruit and vegetable juice experiencing, some growth and a small value, but continuing to grow as well. So the important thing to note here is when setting your expectations in targeting the Thai market, the consumer base that you're targeting is nowhere near the 69 million, 60 odd million population of Thailand. You're targeting a handful of, from a retail perspective, a handful of retail banners. And from a food service perspective, it's highly fragmented. So you need a very strong distributor that can get into the food service perspective. And from an organic perspective, that the value of your orders are not going to be huge. But over time, it will be expected that the demand for your product will grow and grow at a rapid rate, probably faster than many other markets you may be considering. When we look at the category review side, so the first category we're looking at is dairy, and in particular within this group we have milk and yogurt producers. Milk products, generally speaking, that are doing well are catering to the elderly and children, to either end of the spectrum, and that they have functional elements. We also know that there's a move towards plant-based milk products as well. Yogurt has, generally speaking, been quite stagnant over the research period. Also, for those of you that are wondering where we're getting a lot of this data from, we get it from a whole bunch of sources. The predominant one that we use is Euromonitor. And these are actually the most current reports. So we're talking 2020, 2021 reports. The yogurt subcategory that is showing most promise is in the plain yogurt space. The competitors are just, some of the competing brands, the main competing brands are listed there on the right. When we look at the harmonized code for milk and cream, so at a very high level, 0401, so these codes can go all the way up to 8 digits. So we've come in at a high level. We know that, and for those of you that don't know what a harmonized commodity code number is, it's the international code that's used for the movement of products, and countries use it to measure how much is being exported, how much is being imported, and more importantly for the governments to know what tariffs to apply. So when we look at this category, in Thailand, they generally import about $10 million worth, based on their stats of the ITC calculation, International Trade Center calculations, based on the Hong Kong government stats. About $326,000 US worth of Australian products within this category is imported into Thailand, which puts us at the 5th largest import source for Thailand, which is pretty good. And we see there that with the exception of a couple of Asian markets, most of the imports come from Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. When we look at this category, where do we mostly export product to? It's by a long shot. It mostly goes to China, followed by Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Philippines, Vietnam, and some of the islands in Japan. What's really interesting to note there is that within the top 6, the vast majority are actually ASEAN markets. When we look at yogurt, so it's a slightly narrower code that we were able to use here, which is to 6 digits. We know that about $4 million worth is imported in Thailand, the majority of which comes from Australia. So, which is an outstanding result, really. And when we have a look at where we mostly export our products to, it has Singapore. We've got Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and then Thailand in 4th place. Now you'll note there's quite a big discrepancy there in terms of what the Thai government has reported as being imported into Thailand from Australia versus what ABS has reported as being exported from Australia. That could be because some of the product going into Thailand is going to another source and re-exported in there, or it could be just different recording systems. It's not always perfect. The important thing to note is you're looking for themes. When we look at tea as a category, again there on the right hand side are the dominant brands in the Thai market. What we know is that prior to the pandemic, premiumization was a key driver of the tea category. We know as a result of the pandemic now that the growth opportunities are mostly in the fruit, herbal, green, organic tea spaces, mostly around the health attributes of tea, and so they're looking for functional, healthier teas. Sales of these types of products from Australia, in particular certified organic products, are really only going to be strong in the urban areas where the consumers are the affluent, professional type. When we look at the trade data stats, Thailand has imported a fair bit of, $26 million worth, but from Australia, it's only a small amount. Their dominant sources are China, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, a lot of those are no surprise. When we look at our largest export markets for this category, so 0902, Japan is the biggest importer of Australian teas, followed by New Zealand, China, UK, Germany, US. Georgia has made it. So I think for fun, and when I have more time, in the next months, I'm going to find out why Australian tea is going to Georgia. So certainly, Thailand's not looking so hot when you look at the trade data. And again, quite a discrepancy there between what the Thais have reported as coming in from Australia versus what we typically export. When we look at savoury snacks, we know that the pandemic has actually quite heavily impacted the performance of savoury snacks because savoury snacks generally are on the go. It's normally an on the go purchase, and people haven't been on the go. But when we look at the trends and what's going on in this category, what are people mostly looking for? They're mostly looking for healthier snacking. In addition to, and interestingly, the inclusion of local flavours. Sometimes you expect when someone's buying imported products because they want the flavour from the market, but there is an increasing demand for their local flavours. Some of the big brands are there on the right-hand side that are already prevalent in the market. So when we look at the trade data review, so for nut mixtures in particular, just so that the relevance is to this group, so we've got it's to 6 codes. We know that Thailand imports about over $500,000 US worth from Australia. Australia is in fact the 7th largest source of nuts and other seeds into the Thai market. When we look at where we mostly export the product, New Zealand, Japan, China, US, South Africa, quite a few markets there. In fact, Thailand is outside the top 10 as a destination source. Again, we see quite a large discrepancy in the stats and the data around the value of imports based on Thai stats versus the value of exports based on Australian statistics. And when we look at skincare, it's the fourth category, which is mostly represented across the group within this webinar. We know that there's been strong growth, sales value growth in this category. The pandemic has seen a focus on sort of hygiene, sensitive skin and acne around hygiene, obviously around not catching the virus, and the sensitive skin and acne is around the wearing of the face masks and the rubbing causing some sensitive reactions. We know that where the growth is within the Thai market is around product that can demonstrate innovation on the texture, active ingredients, the natural, ingredients, and of course being certified organic does actually make a difference in terms of the interest in your product and your brand. These are the big brands that tend to dominate in the Thai market. And when we have a look at the trade data, this is the only one where, in fact, the Australian statistics are higher than the Thai statistics. We know that in Thailand, they mostly import skincare products from Japan, South Korea, France, US, UK, so a bit of a mixture between Asia and Europe and of course the US. When we look at our key export markets, Thailand again doesn't feature in the top 10. We see China, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, US, UK. We see these markets tending to dominate Australian exports of skincare products. So as I mentioned, we got a lot of this data from Euromonitor, but we do have other sources that we go to, and sources that you can all go to look for information more broadly and in general include Asialink with their country packs. It could be Australian Food and Grocery Council, which at times commission reports. They've got an excellent one on Indonesia at the moment. You can go to Trade Organic. So Trade Organic, all these workshops that we're delivering along with the slides are all be available on their website. This is Australian Organic Ltd, along with some export guides. If you're in the fresh space, Port Innovation has quite a lot of information. International Trade Centre is where you'd go to for trade data and statistics. Austrade, of course, have a lot of information on their website, and they're rolling out new digital services which aim to provide more information as well. So quite a few sources to go to, and of course Export Connect, we've got all our blogs that we prepare. They're all available on our website, of which we have some on Thailand and the Thai market. And we're also going to be launching our portal shortly, which will give you access to even more market information around Thailand, including competitor overviews. Speaking of competitor overviews, this is the next section that we'll go through. So when you're looking at competitor data sets, one of the things we've noticed in terms of how suppliers tend to record information on their competitors is typically they'll either take a photo, document the price, may add the weight, and generally speaking, that's it. Whereas if you're going to do a thorough competitor overview, there's a lot of data that you really want to gather, and you want to put it on a spreadsheet, and you want to be able to sort it on price, on country of manufacture, by claims, by product size. So in order to really determine what your unique selling proposition is, we of the 95 food businesses that we've helped enter and grow their markets in Asia, 90 of them have all secured new business because of the fact that they were able to articulate to the buyers how they are different to what's in the market and how they will add to the category. So we never approach a buyer to try and replace a competitor in market. We go in to demonstrate that the category is growing and we want to add to the market. And you can't do that unless you can clearly articulate your product benefits. And that's not possible without knowing exactly what's in the market in the first place. So apart from listing the product name and the product photo, weight, price, of course you'll need conversion for you to understand the commercial models around that market for you. You really need to focus on what's the country of manufacture, because you want to compare yourself as much as you can against Western imported products. And while Thailand, and Marissa touched on this, is a prolific producer of food, the professionals, the urban professionals with propensity to spend do look at imported products, and so you are mostly competing against imported products. You need to really look at the product claims, and for us as a group, where most are certified organic, this is a very important point of difference where you're hoping to be picking up a bit of a premium. You need to look at the type of packaging that's used, so not just the size of the packaging, but are they using plastic, glass, cardboard, whatever it is. That will help you determine some trends along the way as well. What position in store do they have? You need to document that. Are your competitors in the category space along with being in the deli, such as condiments, for example? Or are the teas that they're selling on shelf the same tea that they're supplying in their in-store cafes? You need to know this so that you can argue your case around that. What type of is the product on promotion? Obviously, that will impact the price. But then also, what type of promotions are they running? Importer distributor details. So in Thailand, along with most ASEAN markets, they actually list who the importers are on the packaging. And so that you can use that information to understand who you should target and or who you should avoid. Sometimes your distributors that you go out and approach have a direct competitor, and so you don't want to be giving them your prices or your plan for the market or anything of that nature. But some of them are complementary. So they may have a yogurt, a drinking yogurt, but they may not have a certified organic plain yogurt that you want to go and argue, well, you need one because this is the subcategory within the dairy section that actually is experiencing growth. And because they're already distributing drinking yogurt, they are going most likely to all the points where your product needs to be as well. You need to take a category photo to see where all the brands fit in a planogram. And although they're not very strong on planograms, you still need to be able to see where they fit, and then you need to be able to model where yours may end up being on the shelf. If your product is going to food service, you need to study the menus of the high-end restaurants. Sometimes they express in it where the meat comes from, where the wine comes from, where the cheese comes from. So study that, look at price points, work backwards. When we are able to travel, and where English language permits, asking wait staff on what items within the menu are the most popular, and so you might start seeing a theme across a few of the different restaurants that they're mostly looking at chicken, or they're mostly looking at fish, or they're whatever it might be, whatever relates to you and to your category. And then once you've got the assessment across food service, if that's relevant, across e-commerce, by jumping on all the marketplaces and documenting prices there and looking at retail, you then start to see themes and understand where you fit within the realm of that market. So when we look at the competitor reviews, when we look at the milk and yogurt space, and here we've just listed a few because for the purposes of time, when we typically undertake these competitor reviews, we go up to 100, 200 brands sometimes, depending on the niche nature of the product. So here we see the Woolworths product, Macro, selling, this is their soy milk in the Tetra Pak, selling at $4.90 Australian. We see Pure Harvest at $5.20. And then we see a Thai product at less than half the price. We see from a yogurt perspective, Chobani coming in from Australia. We see the Farmers Union being a bit cheaper than Chobani, despite being a larger pack size. And then we see a product coming in from Spain, which is a much smaller pack size, but significantly cheaper. So you can imagine once you look at about 100 of these types of different brands, you start seeing what is popular, but then you also start seeing gaps. And do you fill that gap? Can you articulate how you're going to grow that category within the market? From a tea perspective, we don't have any Australian examples to share, but we see product coming in from the UK and Germany, but also from local produced teas, and the fluctuation in price is also quite large. So we're focusing mostly on organic products, because the group here is certified organic. We can see from the UK product varying in price from $12.20 to $6.75, so nearly half the price with a third smaller size. So that shows that premiumization does work in Thailand. It does make a difference. We even see some of the local product, in this particular case, and this is why we've shared it, despite being 60 grams, is actually the most expensive of the lot. So this is certified organic lemongrass pandan tea. So it's a well-recognized local brand, and it's associated with premium. So again, this is to demonstrate that there is a demand for premium products, even for local premium product. You just got to be able to articulate your point of difference. When we looked at sort of the mixed nuts category, we've got, again, Macro available. So Macro is selling exclusively through Villa Market. So we see they've got their organic trail mix there. We see some product coming in from Malaysia. Quite expensive, actually, for Malaysian standards. We see the US product, Planters, of course, coming in at more expensive than Macro. And it's not certified organic. So you can see Macro there being able to articulate a point of difference. We've got some local product in Thailand that's a chia seed and cashew, but still small bag, 100 grams. So compared to the Woolworths product, it's more than half the size, but it's more than half the price. And this is where you start building cases to buyers in articulating your points of difference. And then we see the Blue Diamond mixed nuts, not certified organic. There's not a lot of certified organic product on the shelves. It's growing. The demand for it is growing, but it's still coming in at a very, very low base. From the organic skincare side of things, we see European products dominate, which is not surprising because when we looked at the trade data, most of the sources of the skincare products, according to the HS codes, were from Europe. But you can see some product is really quite pricey, and you'd wonder whether in Thailand they would afford it, and clearly they do. So showing that there are pockets within the urban areas that professionals are willing to spend on their disposable incomes on some product. And so we see Evolve having its face mask at $44 coming from the UK, Nuts Bio coming from France, 50 ml at $77. And then, different product coming in at different levels along the way. So this is an example of how you can potentially pull together a competitor review, right? So you list the outlet that you saw the information from. In the absence of travel, you'd list there the marketplace that you saw online. You would then list the product name, you'd put the weight, the unit, obviously, you'd have the price in the local currency, and then you'd convert it into Australian dollars. You'd include the image in there as well if you can do that. Otherwise, you keep the image in a separate library and keep referring to it. For our clients, we add the image into the spreadsheet. Then if you're able to find out what the margins are for the market, you can start calculating and guessing what your competitor is landing for. And that will allow you to then compare it with your landed price. Are you selling it for more? Are you selling it for less? You list the country of manufacture. So in this particular instance here, we just took a very small sample of an actual project. and then we compared our client's product to imported product only, which predominantly was from Australia and Spain and Italy. We list the product claims, so you're able to articulate your USP versus what's there, the type of packaging, what section it was available in, and if they ran a promotion. So this is helping you build your case to be able to articulate and argue with the buyer whether your product belongs, and hopefully it does, and how you're going to add to the category. When you look at overall research, so, we just covered economic data, demographic data, we just covered trends, consumer trends, we also covered trends, categories, and we covered channel trends. We covered trade data, and then we covered competitor reviews. And so then what you want to do is build a scorecard that essentially you look at a handful of markets, and this will help you determine which are the ones that maybe that you should focus on. And so what we typically do is we look at the GDP growth rates, and we score that out of 10. and this varies according to the scoring varies depending on product and varies depending on markets being compared. In this particular example, we're saying here that if a market has a GDP growth rate of over 5%, it's going to score a 10 out of 10. So, if it's 0% or less, it's 1, we look at GDP per capita, and so if it's 50,000 or more, we score it 10. And then on a sliding scale, it gets a score. When we look at consumer trends, we see if our product is certified organic, health and wellness, functional, immune boosting, and we're reading that on-the-go, convenient type, easily stockable in convenience stores, then what we'll do is have a look at the consumer trends, and does that match what we do? And if it does, we'd give it a score out of 5. Like we give it 5 out of 5. If it doesn't, then we don't. Ease of doing business. If it's in the top 10%, we give it a top score of 10 out of 10. If not, then it scales down. We look at the channel trends. Are they favorable to our product? Then we look at the category. So what's the category value? And what's the category growth rates? And then we also give it a hypothetical score based on the trends that we read. Again, isn't matching what our products have. We then look at the import data in terms of the total value of Australian products that are imported to that market. And if it's got a high value, then that's a positive thing, because then we know consumers consider Australian products as being a viable source for that particular product. And if we see a lot of Western import, like products coming in from a lot of Western sources, then we know that consumers there are spending on premium product. So we would score that high. And then we'd also have a look at the growth rates of the import data and score that accordingly. And then the competitor review is purely subjective. And so, when you look at the competitors, you're wanting to see, is there evidence of consumers understanding the product benefits that you may be presenting as demonstrated by your competitors? Are your competitors there? And in terms of the claims that they make and the price that they're selling at, can you be competitive? Can you demonstrate value for money? And if the overall feel based on who the competitors are in the market is that there is a demand for your kind of product and you are different, and you can have a commercial model in terms of getting your product working from what your recommended retail price should be, and strip back all the margins to what you need to land at, and you can land it at a price that you are profitable, then you would give it close to 30 out of 30. And so then you tally up all the scores, and we just make that 30. So it's arbitrary, right? So you may consider the competitor review to be worth more and make it out of 50. You may think, but I'd certainly, I wouldn't discourage making the competitor review higher in value in terms of the overall score, but I would discourage you from making it less than 30 out of an overall score of 120. I certainly would give it at least a 25% influence on the overall market score. And then this is an example of one where we did, which was actually for baby food. And in that particular example, we can see that the low-hanging fruit at that time, which was 2 years ago, was the Hong Kong market, very closely followed by Singapore, very closely followed by Malaysia, UAE not far behind, and then Thailand and Indonesia. So that's taking an evidence-based approach to selecting markets. Now, it can be daunting looking at export markets. I mentioned earlier on that there is a need for businesses to diversify markets to mitigate risk against having only a handful of customers or a handful of markets. One of the stats that frightened us when we saw it, and it's on aggregate, but not every business is in that boat. It's on aggregate. Was that the China market represented 80% of overall export dollars for food and agribusinesses. So obviously that's very heavily influenced by the wine sector and supplements and infant formulas. So, and because they're such high value products, it's heavily skewed across the food and grocery panel sector. So really the need to diversify as a result of the pandemic, as a result of trade tensions, but in particular, and this is the exciting part, as a result of the opportunities that are available to Australian food and agribusinesses, particularly certified organic Australian businesses across some of these Asian and Middle East markets is spectacular. And but you just got to do the homework and approach the markets in a evidence-based kind of way to ensure that whatever investment you make in opening these markets or growing them is that the ROI is known. So it's it's really it's very important that you take that approach. And so then you would argue, well, there's only 5 of us in our team, and I'm handling exports, and I'm running production and sourcing and payments and accounts and everything else and legal. Where can I get help? There are a lot of places to get help, starting with Australian Organic Ltd. In terms of this workshop program that's being run, along with their ability to connect you with others that can help. Austrade, of course, is a source of support. These days, they're tending to pick who they work with as opposed to accepting anyone that comes and speaks with them. But nonetheless, it's a point of help, especially with their online offering. That's they've really improved and I think continuing to improve. You've got all the state government agencies. Every single one across Australia has either a grant that you can access and or a program that you can be a part of. How we know that is because we are delivering the export programs for every single state government agency across Australia, with the exception of Tasmania, which has just had an election, and so they're sorting themselves out. So keep an eye out, be aware of that. FIAL has their Meet the Buyer events. They seem to be focusing more on wine sector now as a result of the dramas with China, but they will have some in the future that will open up across the food sector. Of course, Asialink with their country packs. You've got Entrepreneurs Program where they have a business growth grant which supports export along with many other factors. If you have a reputable buyer in an export market and you need to borrow a little bit of money to make the product to sell it, but your bank is unwilling to lend you the money because they don't know who the buyer is, Australian Export Finance Australia can jump in and help with that, and they basically underwrite that loan for you to produce. And of course, from a certified organic perspective, organic certification perspective, there's Organic Systems and Solutions, which most of you would know Mark Wills. She's a legend of the industry. And then, of course, if you can reach out to us at Export Connect. It's what we do. We help companies all the time, not just through the kinds of these kinds of workshops and forums, but also working one-on-one with businesses and prepping them, helping them understand which are the right markets to go to, preparing them for them, and introducing them to our pre-qualified buyer database. So just thinking about, before we look to see if there are any questions, and then moving on to Owen for his topic on certified organic specifically for the Thai market. Just thinking about the Export Connect session that we just did now, we really value feedback. It helps us understand how we're traveling. In particular, if you have comments that you want to share, please share those through the Q&A or reach out to me directly, and we'll take all your comments on board. But for the time being, if you could just, so we get a snapshot of how you found the past hour of insights that we've just shared about the market and the categories and the channels. Could you score your overall experience on this particular session? So not the Asialink session, just this particular one, from 1 to 5. And if you if the experience you had is such that you would recommend this session to peers that are interested in developing export markets. So I'm actually not seeing the results up here. Do we have most of them in? So I think there's a couple of you, we're just waiting on your responses before we move on. I think there's just about 5 more to send in. If you could just send in your responses, and then we can move on. We really value the feedback that you're providing. So you've got 5 seconds to get it in. All right, excellent. Thank you very much. All right, now, do we have questions to cover here, or the questions we're going to cover after the workshop? Yeah, I think we'll the questions will they're a bit bigger questions, so we'll cover those after the workshop. So I thank you, and now if we could call in Owen.
Hello, Najib, and hello, everyone.
The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Najib, for those great insights into the Thai market. I'll be speaking briefly about the regulatory requirements for accessing the certified organic market over there. So without further ado, I will switch to screen share. Just one moment. And here we go. So yes, this is me, Owen Gwilliam. I'm Chief Technical Officer at Australian Organic Ltd. I've been fortunate enough to work in organic certification, especially in Southeast Asia region for 20 years now. I've worked in 15 countries and spent a lot of time in Thailand, mostly certifying operations there who wish to access European, American and Australian markets. But what was one little anecdote from my time there is there's a real grassroots organic movement in Thailand, which is fantastic to see. It seems as though most farmers either know someone or have someone in their family who has had major health problems due to pesticide handling. So there's a very strong grassroots movement, and also partly led by the old king, Bhumipol, who was promoting organic farming practices. So that's great to see. So yeah, that's me. I'll be talking today about regulation. There's basically 2 steps to getting a certified organic product into Thailand. And the first step is getting it out of our country. And the second step is getting it into Thailand. So most of you may already be aware, but just in case there's some who have not been to a prior session and are not aware as yet, the Export Control Act is the relevant legislation which regulates exporting produce with organic in the trade description. So in Australia, the export market for organic produce is regulated. Unfortunately, at this stage, Australian consumers aren't provided the same protection. There's no domestic regulation. However, if you want to export something with organic in the trade description, so that can be on the label or in the commercial documentation that's going with it, that makes it a prescribed good under the Export Control Act. So as a prescribed good, it is illegal to export that without the appropriate approvals. It also regulates the words biodynamic, and interestingly, biological and ecological are in there as well, but that doesn't seem to be enforced, and they're not very widely used terms anyway. So if you want to describe your product as organic, you do need to have the appropriate approval in place to do that, or you will be in breach of federal law. So the latest version of this act is the 2020 version. It's very similar to the prior version. The export market has been regulated for many years in Australia. This is just a new improved act, which is now in force as of March. The Export Control Act specifically references the national standard for organic and biodynamic produce. It excludes some product types. So I noticed Najib was talking about cosmetics and so on. So the Export Control Act does not actually consider cosmetic products as a prescribed good. So technically they don't need to be certified to leave the country with an organic description. But there's a bit of nuance to that. It's worth looking into a little bit further with your certification bodies and with your export market if you're in that type of product space. Interestingly, also pet cosmetics, so products that are intended for use on domestic animals are not covered. But any of the other sort of food, fibre, type products will be regulated according to the Export Control Act, and as such need an organic goods certificate. And that is a consignment by consignment document. It looks a lot like a bill of lading. It's a government document. It needs to be signed by one of the government approved certification bodies for each consignment. It used to be called OPC, Organic Export Produce Certificate. Now it's known as an Organic Goods Certificate. And to get an Organic Goods Certificate for your consignment, you will need to be certified by one of the Department of Ag approved certification bodies in Australia, of which there are 6. You can find them on the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment website. So you'll need to be certified operation, and your product will need to be certified as well. If you're using a brand manufacturer, perhaps your contract manufacturer may be able to provide that service for you, but it is worth having a very good knowledge of the certification scope and making sure your product is covered by the scope of the certification, and the facilities that they're handled in are covered by the scope of the certification as well. So provided you're complying with the Export Control Act, the good news is that Thailand is one of the easiest markets. So there's no specific organic equivalence agreement in place or trade agreement in place, and there doesn't need to be. If you have your organic goods certificate going with the produce, even just with your BUD logo or other certification body logo, it will be allowed in at their end. There is a Thai organic logo, and maybe some markets, some consumers or some of your buyers over there may prefer to have that logo. So that would be a conversation to have with them. In the marketplace over there, the most common logos you'll see will be the USDA organic logo or the EU logo, sometimes alongside the Australian Certified Organic BUD logo. And iPhone is also a common logo that you will see over there. That's International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements. But there's no regulatory requirement for a logo there at all. They will just be that'll be dependent upon your customers' preferences over there. So as with any export market, despite Thailand being an easy one, a simple one in terms of regulation, definitely plan ahead and speak with your certification body here in Australia, and also speak with your customer or distributor or wholesaler over in Thailand to make sure that you are not going to get product stuck at one of the ports or not selling well because that's not what they wanted. All right, that's it for me. I'll go off screen share. Happy to take any questions, but for now I'll hand back over to Najib.
We're too good at what we do, Owen.
I probably went a bit fast then, because I've I've been doing a few of these, and this is one of the easier markets, so there wasn't as much to talk about, which is great news if you're looking at the Thai market.
Excellent. Well, look, I have no questions have come through, so other than you know, we've received some like offline very heavy questions. So we do have one. Can FTA requirements be explained for Thailand? Yes, it can, but that's a heavy topic that needs some documentation to share as well. So that was from Annie. So thank you, Annie, for being the star that puts the most difficult question forward. Are there any other questions that we got? No? All right. I think everyone's keen to have lunch. Well, maybe everyone has been having lunch while we've been talking, and they're very content. I'm certainly keen to go out and get lunch. So if there are no other questions, I think we can call it a close. Owen, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Great to hear that Thailand is not as complex as some of the other markets we've heard about in terms of getting the certification recognised in market.
Sure, thanks for having me. And if any questions come your way relevant to certification, feel free to forward them on and we'll get back to them.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again. And see you next month. What's next month? Do we know which market? Malaysia. So Malaysia is being covered next month. So until next time, same bat channel, same bat channel. Anyway, we'll see you all next month. Take care, everyone. Thanks, Owen. Bye.